been a remarkable year for Nintendo Switch, and Monolith Soft is ensuring a strong finish with Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Building on the technology which powered Xenoblade Cross on the Wii U, this new game expands upon its engine in numerous ways, enabling cool new visual effects in the process. But this ambition is met with unexpected drawbacks which do detract from the overall presentation. Can these new enhancements overcome its limitations? Let's find out. Xenoblade 2 promises a massive open world to explore with the freedom the series has become known for, but this time, it's not evident from the outset. You see, unlike previous games, Xenoblade 2 is focused on narrative, and the first hour of the game is designed to pull players into that story. It works, and by the time you arrive in the first massive open area, you have a real objective driving you forward. And what a world it is! Xenoblade 2 is a beautiful game, with lands stretching far into the distance with a massive sense of scale. Exploring islands and cities suspended above the clouds channels a feeling I haven't experienced since Skies of Arcadia back on the Dreamcast. From this point, it's immediately tempting to explore its outer boundaries, but it's when looking out across this landscape that the first major issue becomes evident: image quality. There's been a lot of discussion around this point, so what are we looking at here? Well, firstly, as a reminder, Xenoblade Cross on Wii U serves as the basis for Xenoblade's 2 engine, and runs at a native 720p. In comparison, Xenoblade 2 on Switch is also 720p. Okay, so this is a tricky one. There's been a lot of talk about dynamic resolution, and this is partially accurate, as we'll see in a moment, but when docked, the game is effectively a 720p experience. Even after counting more than 30 different shots, every single one showed a result of 720p. It's not impossible that it could jump up to 900p, but for all intents and purposes, I've never seen it happen. So why the confusion then? Well, this is likely caused by the aggressive temporal anti-aliasing feature, which does effectively eliminate aliasing in many scenes, but introduces serious blurring and motion artifacts as a result. Now, at a glance, it can produce an image that does look slightly higher resolution, but if you count the pixel edges in motion, the base resolution is always coming up as 720p. Which is an interesting result then. While the base res is effectively the same as Xenoblade Cross, the introduction of TAA can help clean up the image. Sure, it's blurrier overall, but it's a lot cleaner as well. But this is just the docked mode. Once we go portable, things take an interesting turn. Unlike dock mode, we did run into many different pixel counts in portable mode, so an adaptive resolution is clearly in effect here. And we found several different results, ranging from 552p or so to 432p, or even as low as 368p in some cases. There's probably other values in there as well, but ultimately this is not a game that ever comes close to reaching 720p in portable mode. This is one of the lowest resolutions we've pixel counted since the sub-native PS Vita days. What's worse, a strong sharpening filter is used here, resulting in a very messy overall image. There's evidence of this filter in docked mode too, mind you, but it's much stronger in portable, introducing nasty edge ringing everywhere. There's no doubt about it then, Xenoblade 2 has the worst portable image quality we've seen in any Switch game to date. But wait, earlier I said it was a beautiful game, and that's true. You see, if you can get past the resolution issues, there is an absolutely lovely world here to explore. The improvements made to the engine since Xenoblade Cross are numerous, and it definitely does enhance the presentation. From the start, one of the features I really like is the addition of per-object motion blur, something used heavily throughout the game's many cutscenes. It's not an especially high-resolution implementation, but the results still manage to look great. I just love the animation work in this scene. The use of specular highlights along the deck of the ship, the rain, and the motion blur, it helps build a dramatic moment. Another nice addition then is the cloud simulation. The team has devised a method for rendering clouds which helps give them proper volume both above and below. If we view these clouds at an accelerated speed, you can really appreciate the effect in action. It looks great. Once you start exploring the world then, we see even more improvements. Water reflections have been enhanced from the previous game and now make use of screen space reflections, enabling more realistic results compared to the static cube maps used in Xenoblade Cross. Of course, there are limitations with the way the reflections are implemented, as there are visible halos around objects and characters wandering about throughout the water, which can be a little distracting. But overall, it looks pretty good. Lighting is also improved in this game. Look at the bottom side of these creatures, for instance. They take on a slightly green hue as a result of the surrounding grass. Now, there's no real-time GI system in use, of course, but the engine does attempt to simulate a very rough approximation of ambient lighting throughout the game, lighting which changes depending on the time of day. The density and quality of the rendered foliage is also improved, with plants now taking on realistic specular highlights visible while exploring the world. Now, none of the foliage actually reacts to your character, but it does look nice. The draw distance is acceptable as well, but you'll notice it drawing in while exploring larger planes. Same goes for other elements such as scene geometry or characters. That said, while LOD popping is common, it's still an improvement over Xenoblade Cross, which had huge objects just appearing right in front of the player. Materials have received a noticeable overhaul since Xenoblade Cross as well. Notice how light from this torch plays realistically off the metal, revealing its material, while light is now more diffuse as it passes over the wooden planks. While the game goes for a less realistic aesthetic overall, the handling of materials across the board is generally pretty good, especially when dealing with things like metal. Ambient occlusion is also implemented well this time. When standing outside of direct light, we see a very diffuse contact shadow present around the character and in crevices, and it works pretty well here, even if it's very approximate. Unfortunately, shadows themselves work very much the way they did in Xenoblade Cross, in that they are completely static. During the day, shadows are visible and they do cast on your character, while larger objects such as this windmill even update the shadow appropriately, but the sun position has no impact on shadow projection. It's simply a case where at night, the shadows are just not drawn. Not a huge issue, but it does detract somewhat from the day and night cycle. On the other hand, collision detection is now more robust. In Xenoblade Cross, players could run straight through any number of objects, which looks really strange, but no doubt saves on performance. While you can still move through things like smaller trees in Xenoblade 2, most objects now have a collision mesh that prevents players from passing through what should be solid objects. And while the world itself looks rather similar to Cross, character rendering has changed significantly with a style that mimics animation more closely than the previous games. I think it's an improvement overall, despite these awful pants that Rex insists on wearing. Also, as nice as the main characters look, some of these side characters can leave a lot to be desired. I can't help but feel a little bad for Mr. Diving Suit over here. So overall then, the visual feature set is improved over the previous game, but what about performance? This is where things get a little iffy. Xenoblade 2 exhibits some very strange performance characteristics. Let me try to explain. Okay, so if we load the game here in this town and wander around, performance is generally close to or locked at 30 frames per second. It's smooth enough and performs exactly how you'd expect given the scale of the game. Now let's wander out into the world. The frame rate is still fine, right? Okay, so let's keep going in this direction. Now, we're about 2 minutes out of town. If we stop here and turn around, this is where things get interesting. Almost immediately, we're seeing drops with sustained performance below 30 frames per second. It's certainly not as smooth as it was just a moment ago, but hey, perhaps it's related to what's currently in view. This is where it gets strange. As we approach the town, the performance remains poor, and once we eventually cross into the town itself, the frame rate drops all the way to the low 20s and remains there. In other words, it's not smooth at all. So what's going on? Why was it smooth one moment and now the same area runs like this? A bug perhaps? Well, I closed the game and reloaded my save here in town and performance was restored. At this point, I wandered back out into the field, turned around, ran back into town, and the results are just as you see. The performance dropped again. So what's happening here? Our best guess is a streaming or memory related issue. By wandering that far out of town, the game is required to swap assets in and out of memory, and perhaps this is introducing the problems we're seeing here. As I'm playing the downloadable version of the game, I also tested it out on both internal storage and an SD card, which by the way was kind of a hassle owing to the limited onboard memory and large file size of the game. Either way, the results were basically the same. Now, aside from this type of situation, the game does manage to hit 30 frames per second relatively often and feel generally smooth. But then we run into things like this and the performance drops pretty hard. Hopefully this is something that can be addressed in a patch. So how about handheld performance then? Well, there's no easy way to measure a 30 FPS game using a camera, and thus we can't really present any actual data here, but the general sense is that the game runs similarly in handheld mode. I wouldn't go in expecting a huge leap in frame rate, as we've seen in several other titles such as Zelda. And I think that this inconsistency kind of ties back into the presentation as a whole. What we have here is a visually upgraded game over Xenoblade Cross, but one let down by poor image quality and unstable performance in certain situations. Compared to the many polished works released by Nintendo this year, Xenoblade 2 feels somewhat unrefined. It looks and runs somewhat worse than Zelda, that's for sure, while lacking some of the more advanced rendering features. Still, despite these issues, this is ultimately a nice looking game, and the art direction does manage to overcome its flaws. Beyond that, the experience itself has been excellent thus far. The characters are charming, the world engaging, and the soundtrack incredible. It may be rough around the edges, but it's still an excellent RPG and one well worth checking out. But that's all we have for now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.
You with us.
Me? You gonna drag the kid along? Seriously?
Guess he thinks you need all the help you can get.
Oh, yeah.